Yesterday, some big news was reported from Ukraine that's starting to make waves across Latin America. If you've never heard of the Bolivar Battalion, this is a unit of mostly Venezuelan exiles that is currently fighting for Ukraine in the war of aggression started by Russia. There are Colombians and Ecuadorians and Mexicans and folks from other Latin American nationalities also in this unit, but it is mostly Venezuelan exiles. Yesterday on Twitter, the Bolivar Battalion reported that Ukrainian forces captured the first Cuban POW who was fighting for Russia in this war. Now, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has not said anything about this yet, but we do have video footage of the alleged Cuban POW. Here he is, bound and blindfolded inside of this vehicle. At a glance, he looks Latin American to me, and I generally trust the Bolivar Battalion. This is a huge deal for Venezuelans. For the people of the Bolivar Battalion, these Venezuelans are exiles and they watched how Cuba and Russia both helped Maduro destroy their country. So for these Venezuelan exiles, the fact that they are fighting against Russian soldiers and now Cubans, it's a really big deal for them. Recently, I uploaded a video to this channel explaining how Cubans were being trafficked from Cuba and hoodwinked to go fight in the Russian army in Ukraine. Less than 2 weeks ago, a video was leaked by a couple of Cubans who were in a civilian hospital and denouncing their entire situation, and they were hoodwinked. I added subtitles to it, and here is the footage of these 19-year-old Cuban teens explaining exactly what happened to them and how they were trafficked to fight for Russia in the Ukraine war.
Fue una estafa y nos dijeron que era para la construcción, para arreglar las casas devastadas por la guerra, para abrir trincheras, para recoger escombros, y al final todo fue una estafa.
Todo fue una estafa, no nos han pagado, no tenemos los pasaportes, no tenemos documentos, no tenemos nada. Ahora mismo estamos aquí en cuero.
Nos quitaron todos los documentos. Nada más llegamos aquí a Rusia, nos quitaron todos los documentos.
Hemos estado en más de 7 ciudades de Rusia. Nadie nos ha hecho nada, en todos los hospitales que llegamos es lo mismo, nos hacen las mismas pruebas, nadie sabe de nosotros.
Cuando firmamos el contrato nos dijeron que no podíamos traducirlo, estaba en ruso, no sabíamos qué decía el contrato, nos dijeron que no nos preocupáramos, que solo firmáramos. Firmamos y después de poco tiempo nos mandaron para una unidad en Rizán y de ahí nos mandaron para Ucrania.
En Rizán estuvimos como 2 semanas por ahí. Después de las 2 semanas nos dijeron que no iban a cambiar para otro lugar, supuestamente un lugar mejor. Siempre eso era un lugar mejor, para ir por un lugar mejor. Terminamos en Ucrania, la 3ª línea. Todo tranquilo, íbamos a entrenar, nos enfermamos y vinimos para acá. Pero ahora las amistades nosotros están en la 1ª línea. Y nadie dijo nada de eso, que teníamos que ir para la 1ª línea ni para la 2ª línea.
Eso de que los cubanos están bien, eso es mentira. Hay muchos cubanos que están desaparecidos, muchos cubanos que la familia no sabe nada de ellos. Y todo es una estafa. El contrato nos lo hizo una mujer cubana y una rusa. Y nada, solo nos dijeron que firmáramos y hasta ahora no nos han pagado, no nos han atendido, no nos han dado los documentos. Nos tienen en un hospital aquí y nadie sabe de nosotros.
Lo que necesitamos es que nos ayuden. Traten de ayudarnos, no sé, como puedan para poder salir de aquí, porque verdaderamente que aquí... y la otra es que no nos entienden nada. A esta gente aquí tú le hablas y ni te entienden nada.
Ni te ayudan, ni te dan respuestas, uno le pregunta y no le dan respuestas, nada.
Las mismas pruebas que nos han hecho en 5 hospitales atrás, las mismas que nos están haciendo aquí.
When I uploaded this footage to Twitter yesterday with these subtitles, a lot of people were immediately commenting, well, screw around and find out, or these guys should have known better than to go work for an occupation force. But it's not that simple. Remember, just like so many Russian youth have not really been well educated, they've been indoctrinated. Same thing with these Cuban youth, if not worse. Cuba is still a communist country, or if you're one of those pure communists, it is a Soviet-style socialist country, state capitalist with a hyper-authoritarian government, whatever stupid label you want to use. These kids did not grow up in a free country. They grew up in an extremely poor country. You can tell from their dialect that they're bohemian, they're poor, they're not very well educated. So when they were sold on the idea of working civilian construction jobs in newly annexed territories of Russia, they probably didn't put two and two together that they were going to Ukraine. Also, they were probably hyper-focused on the 200,000 rubles they would be paid, which is about 2,000 US dollars, and that seems like absolutely nothing. For a bounty for going to war, that is absolutely nothing. But remember, $2,000 is 3 or 4 times what the average working-class Cuban will make on that island in a whole year. So for these guys, this was a dream ticket. They would be able to support their families back home and possibly get Russian citizenship so they could get the rest of their families off of that hellhole of an island. And I repeat, they were lied to, they were trafficked, they were lured. This is human trafficking. And I'd also like to remind you of the note that it said in the video in that news report. Approximately 50 Cubans are missing in action on the Russian front in Ukraine. Also, the Russian woman and the Cuban woman that these boys mention who pressured them to sign these contracts that they couldn't read are probably Diana and the Russian woman Elena Shuvalova, whom we mentioned in the last video on this channel. It's probably them. One interesting development last week, Cuba announced a major operation, arrested 17 people who were involved in trafficking Cubans to go fight in Russia. But in my opinion, that is just a dog and pony show. Because mysteriously at the beginning of the war, Russia gave Cuba a postponement for a $2 billion loan that the Cuban government owed the Russian government. Cuba and Russia have had a military partnership that goes back 6 decades since Soviet advisors oversaw the Cuban Armed Forces repression in the Escambray Rebellion, which was a much larger, longer, and deadlier Cuban civil war than the Revolutionary War that overthrew Batista. Knowing the Cuban regime's history, they probably know full well that Cubans are being sent to fight for Russia, but with this dog and pony show, they can point to, hey, we're taking actions to stop trafficking, and that way that regime will not be held responsible on the international stage or on the diplomatic level for participating in Russian war crimes. But you heard it from these boys themselves. They were hoodwinked and bamboozled and sent to be cannon fodder. And the only reason these boys were able to get the message out is because they got sick and pulled back from the front lines. It is extremely depressing for me. I spent 6 years of my life doing full-time activism for the freedom of Cubans and Venezuelans, and to see Cubans being drawn into this war, especially under false pretenses, damn, it's heartbreaking. Anyway, thank you for watching Venezuela Explained. And if you want to know what's really happening in Latin America, what the Cuban regime is doing all over the region, and in Eastern Europe, you can like this video and share it with your friends. This is information that people need to know. The Cuban regime does not care about human life, but they do care about bad press. Thank you.